Right now, we want to welcome co-founder of Black Voters Matter, Cliff Albright. Cliff, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, what are your thoughts so far about the hearing? We are less than 20 minutes away from the second primetime hearing. There's been a lot in the news of late, particularly around the text messages or lack of text messages being made available by Secret Service to the January 6th committee. What do you make of what's happening as we're heading into this historic primetime hearing?
Yeah, I think historic is a word that we really can't overuse enough when we're talking about these hearings. I think the first thing that we always got to keep in mind, especially us as Black folks, is that when we're talking about this insurrection and the attempts to overturn the election, we have to be really clear that what this hearing is really about is the attempts to silence and overturn Black votes, right? Keep in mind, they were trying to overturn particular states. And when you look at the states that they were saying were fraudulent elections, we know that in Georgia, they were trying to say was fraudulent, right? Donald Trump was obsessed with those Black votes in Atlanta and Fulton County. We know that they were obsessed with Black folks in Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania results. We know that they were obsessed with the Michigan results. Essentially, what they were protesting and what the insurrection was about was trying to say that these Black votes were fraudulent and therefore these state totals were fraudulent and that the entire election needed to be overturned. So we've got to be crystal clear about that fact. I think Jamil did a good job of saying it. White supremacy is, at least to a certain extent, on trial when we're talking about this insurrection and talking about these hearings. But I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind, talking about the history of it, is that this is not the first attempt to violently overthrow an election. Again, as Black folks, we know this history of them trying to overthrow elections. We can go all the way back to the Reconstruction era and see that they not just tried, but actually did overthrow elections. We could go back to 1889 in Wilmington, North Carolina, where they overthrew and had a coup and got rid of local governance there. And so as Black folks, we've seen this before. And that's why I think we're very clear that what we're seeing is still a slow motion insurrection taking place. And it's something that we've got to take very seriously, because if they don't deal with this adequately, then basically what this becomes is just practice for the next successful coup attempt.
And Cliff, let me start by saying thank you for the incredible work that you and your co-founder, Latasha Brown, have done with Black Voters Matter in really communicating to Black voters, providing resources for voter registration, for Get Out the Vote. I've seen the impact that y'all have had here in Texas, pushing back against all of the incredible legislation to take away our voting rights. As Black Voters Matter prepares for mobilizing Black voters in the 2022 election, we do have all of this drama. We've got the text messages being erased. We've got the former president lunging at Secret Service and trying to grab the steering wheel. We've got more drama than my mom's stories that she still watches to this day. How is Black Voters Matter planning on weaving this drama that, as you said so rightly, is all intended to erase the votes and the choices, the intelligence of Black voters? How does that messaging play with the folks that y'all are talking to with your plans going into November? Will this be a big part of the conversation?
Yeah, I think so. To the extent that it's connected to everything else that our communities are concerned about. In other words, when you know that you've got white supremacists that were trying to overthrow an election and were willing to resort to violence in order to do so, there's a straight line that connects that to everything else that we're seeing, right? To the attacks on teaching race in the school systems. We see that there's a connection between this insurrection and the growing authoritarianism and the attempt to control women's bodies, which will have disastrous impact, particularly on Black women, who we already know have maternal mortality rates that are 6 times higher than white women's maternal mortality rates. And so anything that restricts or criminalizes abortion, we know that from both of those perspectives, from the health perspective, but also from the criminalization perspective, that's going to have a disastrous impact on our community. All these issues are connected. even if you're concerned just with inflation, right, and that's your main issue, right, which I always say isn't really inflation, it's actually just price gouging, because there's no economic reason for these prices to go up right now. It's simply price gouging and corporate greed. But even if that's your main issue, guess what? You can't expect somebody to care about your pocketbook and about your kitchen table economic issues or about your inflation when you've got some people who fundamentally don't believe that you have the right to exist, that fundamentally don't care if the police are abusing or killing you, and don't care if women are dying trying to give birth when they, even when their life is at risk. If they don't care about your fundamental rights to vote, if they don't care about our humanity, they're not going to care about the inflation that our communities are dealing with. So part of what we do when we talk to folks is that we get them to see that all of these issues are connected, and that's why it's important that we be involved in making sure that we've got not just the White House but a Congress that will actually act on the issues that we care about, and that means adding to the already even Senate that exists, because we all know that two of those folks on one team aren't really part of the team in terms of Manchinima.
So, Manchinima, that's a good one. Cliff, thank you for joining us. So I want to bring that into focus, the control of the United States Senate, right? And we talked about, and Nicola talked about, and you talked about in your former response there, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, all possible areas where there are the potential for Democrats to pick up 3 seats. There's a lot of polling that sort of shows that there's a disillusionment amongst African-American voters because they went to vote in 2020 with high aspirations and with commitments from the White House and from Democrats to get major things done that have not always been done, whether it be voting rights, whether it be police reform, etc. So what's the message that you guys are sort of bringing home to voters in a time in which a lot of African-American voters feel like they're going to the bank and they're trying to withdraw money, and the bank keeps telling them, the bank of the Democratic Party, that keeps telling them that there's insufficient funds for the fact that they voted over and over again?
Right. No, that's a great question. And part of what we have to do is we have to learn the lessons from 2 years ago, which is really a lesson that should have been learned even before 2 years ago. But we have to be very clear. And what we're doing with Black Voters Matter is we have what we call a voting rights contract, right? And really we're doing this on other issues too, but particularly with voting rights, where we're saying, look, it's not enough that we just, you hear this language, right? That, oh, Democrats just need 2 extra seats. That's not necessarily the case if you get 2 more people who are just like those other 2, Manchinima, who are going to go there and not be in support of voting rights and not be in support of modifying the filibuster or ending the filibuster, not even just for voting rights, but for all these other issues that we've been talking about where the Senate is holding things up. So what we're demanding is that folks candidates sign a voting rights contract up front where they commit to things like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or the Freedom to Vote Act or modifying the filibuster or even expanding the court, which is also something that we need to have more and more conversations about, getting them to go on record now while they're campaigning, so that we don't get surprised come January after we've added 2 seats and then we find out that the 2 people that we added aren't really committed to doing the things that we thought that they were going to do. I'm actually going to say something right now that I haven't said anyplace else. Not only if the Democrats do right, and as long as the election is not stolen, which is a big if, I believe that Democrats are not just going to pick up the 2 extra seats. I believe there's a possibility to pick up 3 seats. You already mentioned Wisconsin. We know about Pennsylvania. We know about Ohio. I even believe that North Carolina, Sherry Beasley is definitely in play there. I think that there's opportunities to gain at least 3 seats, but that's only going to happen if between now and then Democrats continue to show and do some of the things that the House is doing right now. They've passed a series of bills which is trying to make that line very clear, the difference between this party and that party, the difference between a party that'll say that we're going to protect women and that we're going to protect contraception, or we're in 2022 talking about whether or not there's a right to have contraception, but that they're passing things that make those lines crystal clear. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be necessary so that voters understand that there's a clear difference and they've actually got some folks and some legislation that will get passed if we come out and vote.
Cliff, I'm so glad that you're here because I've been dying to ask you this question. I was just reading in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that since 2017, 45 states have considered over 200 anti-protest bills, so far enacting 38 of them, mostly in reaction to the work of Black Lives Matter and environmental protesters, among others. For the folks that are just now tuning into this, these laws significantly increase liability for common forms of peaceful protest. Are you as concerned about this as I am and as our viewers should be?
Yes, we're very concerned. In fact, there's a case that we're talking about right now where we've got a petition going for a sister named Brittany Martin, who was in South Carolina, who was leading a Black Lives Matter protest, and she got arrested, prosecuted for what would basically be like disturbing the peace. But because of this anti-protest hysteria, she's been sentenced to 4 years in jail, and she is 3 months or 4 months pregnant right now. So yes, we are very concerned about that the wave of the anti-protest bills. I know that the hearing's about to start, but folks can see our social media or our website if they want to learn more about that case or about what we can do more broadly to deal with this anti-freedom of speech movement.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go to a break and we'll be right back. You're watching Fox Soul's primetime coverage of the primetime January 6 hearings.